Hello and welcome to Catamount Community Connection, your weekly Sunday public affairs program. I'm Brian Collamore, hosting the 1-hour show each week, and we speak with different folks every week, business, professional, nonprofit, and yes, political arenas. And the goal of the program to make our listeners aware of things that are going on, not just in Rutland County, but throughout the state, maybe a new law or regulation that went into effect, and other programs focus on events that we hope are fun and that folks will want to know about. Our program is brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846, and we're looking forward to the 178th Fair. It's only a couple of weeks away, folks, August 13th through 17th, 2024, at the Vermont State for the Vermont State Fair at the Rutland Fairgrounds. I'll just mention again, Tyler Hubbard is going to be the vocal performer the final night of the fair on Saturday. If you don't have tickets yet, I would urge you strongly to get them soon. This promises to be a sold-out concert. You can go on as you listen to this show and go to ParamountVT.org. Today, we are very happy to welcome in for his first appearance with us, State Treasurer Mike Pieciak. And he is going to tell us a little bit about himself before we get started with some of the questions that I have for him here. Mike, welcome in. Thank you for coming down. And tell us a little bit about Mike Pieciak. How did you get involved in politics and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, thanks, Brian. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show and pleasure to have the opportunity to talk a little bit to your listeners. The first exposure that I had to politics is when I was growing up in Brattleboro, and I remember my parents took me to a ribbon cutting of sorts. It was a boat launch for what was called the Belle of Brattleboro, and it was this sort of cruise ship that would go up and down the Connecticut River sort of in the evening. It was a great sort of community, activity and community business. And Governor Richard Snelling, who was the governor at the time, I was probably 7 years old or so. He was in his second time being governor. And he came to Brattleboro. He came to the christening of the Belle of Brattleboro. I remember him really being very gracious with his time with me as a little kid and talking to me, and his being very magnanimous, and everyone in Brattleboro being really interested in him and impressed by it. And I didn't know what a governor was. I didn't know what he was. I didn't know what politics. I didn't really know any of that. And I remember after the event was over, sort of asking my parents about who he was and what job did he have and what did he do and what did that mean. And so it was really the first sort of exposure that I had to public service and to politics. And, as I got older, I really saw the example that my parents set in their community relative to public service. My dad is a CPA. He has a firm in Brattleboro, and he always instilled in me the importance of supporting businesses in Brattleboro, small local businesses that were his clients. We always had to go every Saturday to the diner in Brattleboro, right in Main Street. Even though the food was not very good and the silverware was not very clean, that was the place we went because that was one of his clients, and he wanted to support them. And he helped bring lights to the football field in Brattleboro so we could have Friday night football games and sort of have that community activity. He helped bring a teen center, now the Boys and Girls Club, to Brattleboro so that kids had a safe place to hang out. He helped expand the golf course from 9 holes to 18 holes so that was sort of a bigger community asset for Brattleboro. And I remember asking him, why do you spend so much time doing all this, work for the community, taken away from other things that you could be doing? And he said to me that Brattleboro had given him so much, Brattleboro had given our family so much, that it was the least that he could do to give back to the community. And that just really stuck with me as I thought about what I wanted to do in my career. What are the ways that I can give back to Brattleboro? What are the ways I can give back to Vermont? Because similarly, I feel like Vermont has given me and given my family a lot. And then similarly, my mom had a different example, but still very community oriented. She was pregnant with me when she founded a soup kitchen in Brattleboro called St. Bridget's Kitchen.
Wow.
And she ran the soup kitchen until just a few months ago when she retired after 40 years as the director. And, I spent a lot of time with her going around Brattleboro, delivering meals to vulnerable people in our community and seeing the way that she would interact with them and spend time with them and be patient with them and be compassionate toward them, and just really instilled, again, this idea that everybody matters. Everybody has value in our community, and we need to find a way to try to have everybody be successful. So those lessons of giving back, those lessons of sort of that moral obligation to give back, when you're in a position to do so, really sort of helped guide me into public service and really made me interested eventually in running for state treasurer.
And that was the first elected thing for you? You didn't go for like a select board or a school board or something else first?
I was a sixth grade class president, I think.
You know what? People have asked me. I was the class president in the fourth grade.
Oh, there you go. All right, nice.
And I never lost an election.
Yeah,
I could say that.
There you go.
I did run twice, or I'm not. But this is my fifth term in the Senate, but I've never lost that, and I didn't lose my fourth grade president's class either. That's really interesting. So that sounds like a great balance between the business interests of a community and the sort of social fabric that's really necessary too. So I'm sure your parents were great models for you.
Yeah. They also, the other thing that, the balance that they brought was my dad's a Republican and my mom's a Democrat. So I used to joke that they could watch TV in the same room when I was growing up, and now they can't any longer. But, but at the same time, what that sort of instills in you is, okay, there's something bigger than politics. Relationships are more important than politics. Like we should be able to communicate and love people that have a different opinion than us. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's certainly, an example that they set too, just by the way that they've been married now for over 50 years and also are from different political parties.
Yeah. Certainly, I think Vermont is an example of where we do get along with the other side, regardless of which side you're on. It's a civil sort of procedure, at least in the Senate. I can't speak for the House. I've never been in the House. It operates a little bit differently than the Senate. There's a lot more people. There's 150 House members and only 30 senators. So it does take a little bit more of a thoughtful approach, at least from my point of view in the Senate. You represent many more people, and so you have to almost take a wider view of a particular issue and make sure you're fairly representing the majority of your constituents. But I think Vermont really does still. I mean, even though if we're out having adult beverages some night and we're with a group of like-minded folks, we might cast aspersions on other members from time to time. But certainly on the floor and in committee, that's just never done in Vermont. It really is, I think, a great example of people trying their best despite different avenues to get to a similar goal. And I think it seems to work pretty well. I mean, I've Jeanette White, who I really, really love to this day. She was my chair in government operations for 8 years, and she and I are the best of friends. I come to Brattleboro, by the way, to referee ice hockey games.
Nice.
It used to be the Colonels. Now they're known as the Bears, I guess, right? And so she would come into the rink in Brattleboro right by that ski lift and come into the referee room in between periods, and we just shoot the breeze about stuff. And we didn't vote a lot the same way, but we just got along famously. And to this day, I deeply respect her, and I miss her.
That's great, Brian. I saw her last night. She's doing well.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. She and Bill. Yeah, that's great.
But I think that idea of like making sure we go out of our way, not just people in state government, but everybody in community, that we go out of our way to make relationships and build relationships with people that think differently than us. I feel like we've been, as a country, and it's permeating here in Vermont, have sort of started to sort of get to our two sides and stop talking to each other. And if we stop talking to each other, it's only going to get worse. All of these things that we don't like about politics right now, anger, hatred, vitriolic, the language we're using, everything. We need to sort of get back to having relationships that are above and beyond politics and start talking to each other.
Yeah. Even from just a pragmatic point of view, there are occasions when you may be on the opposite side from someone on a particular vote in the Senate, but a week or two later, another issue comes up, and they're with you on a different thing. Yeah. So you can't make enemies because you never know when you need them. Yeah. And so you try your best to walk that fine line, and I think for the most part, in the Vermont Senate, we do.
Yes.
We're talking to Mike Pieciak, the state treasurer of Vermont. And we have a few items in specific nature that we want to talk about. We did pass last year what is called the Baby Bonds Pilot Program. You came down, Mike, to Rutland, I want to say it was in May, but it might have been even in April. No, it wasn't April because we weren't out of session yet. maybe it was early June. There was a legislative breakfast anyway at the South Side here, and you came down and talked a little bit about that. So for people that are not aware of it, this came about as a bill that was introduced in the House, H-55, and it is now, I think, law, and you are in the middle, I think, of beginning to figure out how to do this. So maybe in the next 5-10 minutes, we could talk about the baby bonds program. What is it? How are we going to do it?
So I'll talk first about what sort of the full program is, what the concept is, and then I'll talk a little bit about the pilot that we're in the process of setting up. Okay. So the idea of baby bonds, it's really sort of focused on 3 policy objectives. How do you break the cycle of generational poverty that exists in Vermont or anywhere across the country? But how do you break that cycle of generational poverty? Because it's really hard to do. When you grow up in a family that doesn't have resources, you are falling behind those families that do have resources and can give their children, certain advantages. So those folks are moving ahead, and other folks are sort of stalling and falling back. And how do you break that? How do you make it so that there's more opportunity? And then it's thinking about rural economic development. More children are born into poverty in our rural areas than in our urban areas. So this idea is, how do we invest in our rural parts of Vermont? And then last is trying to think about how do we keep young people in Vermont. Our birth rate's going down. We have an aging state and an aging workforce. We need all of the young people we can to be able to stay in Vermont, afford to be able to stay in Vermont, and want to stay in Vermont. So the Baby Bonds program would set aside $3,200 for every child born into poverty in our state. So the eligibility criteria would be, if you were born on Dr. Dinosaur, born on Medicaid, you'd be eligible for a baby bond. That money would be invested by our office. And then when that child reaches the age of adulthood, between the age of 18 and 30, they could claim their baby bond, which would have grown to, 12 or 13,000 on the earlier side at 18, or more like 24,000 if they wait to the age of 30, to do 4 specific things: buy a house in Vermont, start a business or invest in a business in Vermont for higher education or job training, or roll it over into their retirement. Yeah. So those 4 things are designed to help someone build wealth. One of the biggest differences in wealth is really somebody's ability to have a down payment, and that difference between renting and home ownership through most of your life, or that ability to start a business, which so many Vermonters have done successfully, small businesses, medium, larger businesses, and that's how they have, accumulated assets, been successful in Vermont. Or education. I mean, that's an important investment as well. So they're all focused on wealth creating activities for that individual. But by spending that money in that way, by buying a home in Vermont, starting a business, paying for school here, rolling over into your retirement, all of those things are going to help the broader economy as well. But again, the program is focused on those sort of goals. How do you break the cycle of generational poverty? How do you invest more in rural areas of Vermont? And then how do you entice young people to stay? So you have to be a Vermont resident to be eligible, and then you have to be a Vermonter, to claim your baby bond. And then you use that money to invest yourself into the Vermont community, and that's sort of the concept. So the pilot project, we have authority from the legislature to set up a pilot to sort of see how this works in practice. And what we're going to attempt to do is raise some money from some national foundations that are interested in baby bonds, interested in this sort of concept of, how do we create a new economy going forward that works for everybody in it. And with that money, we're going to identify, let's say, depending on how much we secure, 150, 200 almost adults. So people that are 17 years old, 18 years old. And instead of saying, here's $3,200 at birth, we'll say, here's $15,000 now that you can use when you turn 18 next year, and you can use it for the next 4 years. And we're going to try to capture, how are the outcomes different for those individuals? What did they use the money on? How did their lives change? What is the trajectory that their life is on now? What other gaps existed? Like, was the money sufficient? Were the 4 different possibilities of using the money, were they enough? Were they too narrow? How did we implement the program from the state treasurer's office? How did we monitor the money to make sure it was used appropriately? So those are sort of going to be the goals of the pilot program. And our hope is that we come back to the legislature and say, it's working. It's really been impactful for these children. It's it's achieving those 3 goals that we laid out, and we should establish it permanently and for everybody that's born on Dr. Dinosaur.
So you've answered one of the questions that immediately came to mind. We're talking about, you mentioned grants and donations and that kind of thing. We're not taking money from the general fund or from taxpayer money, correct?
For the pilot project, we would not be. Absolutely right. So then we want to prove that it's going to work. We want to see how, we have great confidence that when you give people resources and you have them use those resources in those 4 areas, that they're going to be improving their lives for the better. But it would be good to see it in practice and have some documented, evidence of that. And then we would be asking for the state to have a permanent program that would come from state resources. We had a suggestion as to how to pay for it when we presented it this year, which was out of our unclaimed property fund. Right. There are other suggestions, certainly. I think you can do it within the state's means now. It's the total program would be about $6 million or $6.5 million. So it's not an enormous program in terms of its cost, but I do think it would be an enormous program in terms of its impact on individuals' lives. And it's the kind of the impact where you would be putting aside, $3,200 or $6 million in a particular year, and that would grow, and the impact would be even bigger by the time that it's being deployed when that child reaches 18.
Connecticut is right now the only other state, I think, that's doing this, right?
Yes, Connecticut has fully implemented the program.
Okay. So the other thing I'm just wondering about, and again, trying to understand the whole process. So someone's born on Medicaid, they get the $3,200, and the family moves to Arizona 2 years later, but they move back.
Yeah.
How does that work? Is the bond still kind of ticking away, making interest while they're gone, as long as they're back in the state when they're 18?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if you're born in Vermont, and you can move away, your family could move away, but you have to be a Vermont resident at the time that you claim your baby bond. So you have to move back to Vermont. So not only is it working to sort of retain people in Vermont, but it would encourage people that have this bond that they're eligible for to move back to the state as well. But you do have to be a Vermont resident, and then the uses of the bond, are connected to the Vermont economy.
I guess the other thing I wonder about, if Connecticut's fully embraced this and they're on their way, why don't we have other states joining us? It seems like it's such a brain-dead, good idea kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, Rhode Island is working on a proposal. Massachusetts is working on a proposal. Montgomery County down in Maryland is working on a proposal. Atlanta, Georgia has a very similar pilot project as the one that we're talking about. California has done a program that focuses on children that are in the foster care system, that are aging out of foster care, and they have it specifically for that population. So you're starting to see, Connecticut was the first. We were, I think, from my estimation, the second state to propose this, to move it forward. But now you're starting to see a lot of states and other levels of government starting to consider it. And the thing I worry about, on top of, just trying to figure out how to give everybody opportunity, is if you're born today in Vermont versus born today in Connecticut in poverty, if you're born in Connecticut, you have this baby bond waiting for you. You're going to be in a much better position in our region than that same child born in Vermont. So I do worry that we're getting, that we're sort of falling behind even from our neighbors who have established this program and are working on establishing it.
Okay. And this is true then, from what you just said, as long as it's a governmental entity, they could do this. So in other words, you mentioned Atlanta, which is a city, not a state.
Yep.
Can townships, counties, all kinds of other governmental organizations pick it up?
Yeah, they're all working on, they're all working on it, not all, but all the ones I mentioned, Montgomery County and Maryland, a couple of cities. There's a proposal at the national level too. I think when you do it at the local level, you have that additional piece of trying to attract or retain people in your city or your county or your state. At the national level, that obviously wouldn't necessarily be one of the objectives. But I think that's why you're seeing a lot of localities, cities, counties, states start to think about the baby bonds program, because not only is it the intergenerational poverty that you're trying to break, not only is it rural economic development, but it's also trying to retain and attract people to your city, county, or state.
And that was one of the more attractive aspects of it for me. You mentioned the rural nature of it.
Yeah.
That'll be up to your team, I guess, to figure out where do we put resources. Are they going to be the same county by county by county, or is there a little bit more given to, for instance, the Northeast Kingdom, figuring, again, as you mentioned, Chittenden County, for the most part, not always true, but it's a more urban area, all told, than it is certainly in the Northeast Kingdom. So
yeah, for the pilot project, what we're thinking about is having it be focused on the Northeast Kingdom, because it's the Southern Vermont has similar rates of poverty, but the kingdom it's higher. The percentage of children born onto Medicaid on the Dr. Dinosaur in the kingdom is at 50% or over 50% in certain counties. In Southern Vermont, we're getting close to 50%. So it's one of our most rural areas. It's one of the most impoverished areas. So it makes sense to focus a more targeted pilot on the kingdom. But, we want to obviously expand this statewide. And if we expanded it statewide, places like Rutland County, places like where I grew up in Windham County, Bennington County, there are a lot of communities that have a lot of children born into poverty.
We're talking to Mike Pieciak, who is the state treasurer for Vermont, and we will take our first break here on Catamount Community Connection. We'll be right back. We are back on Catamount Community Connection. I'm Brian Collamore, your host for the weekly public affairs program here on Catamount Radio. And again, our show brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society. The fair is coming. It's only a couple weeks away. And Tyler Hubbard will be performing on Saturday, the 17th, the final act for this year's fair. If you don't have tickets yet, don't wait. You can buy them right now, even as you're listening to this show, ParamountVT.org. And we're very happy to have Mike Pieciak, who is the treasurer for the state of Vermont, with us. And the full hour is donated to, or not donated, it's concentrated on financial matters of the state. We talked about the baby bonds program, and we also want to talk about a VHFA loan and the housing investments that were made through what is called the 10% in Vermont program. And Mike, you can talk a lot more about that than I can.
Well, basically what that program is looking to do is support the development of new housing in Vermont. When I ran for treasurer in 2022, we made an effort. We went to every single town in Vermont, all 252 towns. We had a lot of conversations with people all over the state. And the thing that I heard consistently was we are in a significant shortage of housing. We have a housing crisis. You talk to a town clerk and they'd say, boy, I've been really busy because I have all these land transactions. We have people moving here. They are moving from out of state. They're buying their home with cash. It's over the asking price over and over and over again. You talk to employers, they would say, boy, I'd love to expand my business. Business is doing well. The demand is high for what we're selling, but I can't because I can't find people because they can't find housing in Vermont. It's the same for hospitals or schools or first responders. They can't find nurses, they can't find teachers, they can't find firefighters because they can't live in the community. So it was so clear to me that housing was a huge number one issue for us in Vermont. And we wanted to think in the treasurer's office, what's the lever that we have that we can make an impact on relative to housing? So this 10% in Vermont program, we sort of are allowed to make investments in economic development. That's sort of the sort of legislative authority. And I made the decision that we wanted to expand this program by about $100 million. So this is $100 million of state cash. And this is money that is otherwise sitting in our bank account earning interest. And we said we want to, instead of having it in a bank account earning interest, we want it out in the communities, building economic development and earning us interest as well. So we decided to do that, expand it to $100 million. We decided to focus on housing because we thought it was the number one thing we could do to have an economic impact was build more housing. And then we decided to have it also be below market interest rates because there were so many projects throughout Vermont that couldn't go forward because of the high interest rates we were experiencing. So we've deployed that money, or a significant portion of it, close to $70 million. We've supported about 1,100 new units of housing throughout the state. We've made $1.6 million so far of investments here in Rutland, with millions more on the docket that we're excited about. And I think that's really the thing we need to keep doing, is figure out creative ways to make investments in the housing space. The legislature's done a lot of work on land use regulation to make it easier to build. I hope that those bear fruit soon, because we need more housing. We need to build it more cheaply. It's our number one economic issue, but it's also impacting things beyond economics. It's driving up the rates of homelessness in Vermont. We're the second highest rate of homelessness in the country per capita. It's making it harder to treat mental health issues and substance use issues because people don't have a stable place to call home. That sort of housing first policy that is an effective way to get people better. But when you don't have any housing, it's hard to have a housing first strategy. And then things like healthcare costs too. People that are experiencing homelessness, they get their medical care at the emergency department. They need to go to the emergency department more often because of their living situation. That is the most expensive place to deliver care in the emergency department. Those costs are absorbed into the system. You have to hire more traveling nurses because they can't find housing in the community. All those things put pressure on healthcare prices. And then even on the accessibility, you talk to every single CEO in the state of Vermont that runs a hospital, and they'll say, we offered a job to a general practitioner. They took it, they came, they couldn't find housing, they decided to go somewhere else, or for a specialist or for a nurse or nurse practitioner. So even the ability to access care in Vermont is impacted by the housing shortage. So I really, again, view it as the key issue that we have to solve for, not just now, but over the next decade. We're going to continue to have pressure on housing in Vermont, and we need to be committed to continuing to put it at the top of our agenda for some time.
Yeah, certainly when I was on the campaign trail in the last term in 2022, the three issues that seemed to resonate with people and they would ask me about it, I think housing was number one, but followed closely by Act 250 reform.
Yes.
And then public safety was also
Yes.
a big issue. People were just so frustrated seeing this sort of revolving door with the same unfortunate individuals going through the system and being released and offending almost before the ink was dry in the paper. So one of the things that we did, I think, a fairly good job with the public safety. We had a couple of bills that came out that I think will impact the judicial system positively. The 250, and I mentioned earlier, from a Senate's point of view, I represent about, I think, 22 or 23,000 people in Rutland County of voting age. So while what we did with the city was great, and you're right, it will, in essence, as long as there's local zoning and the infrastructure is there to support expansion in terms of housing, they won't have to go through Act 250 much like they would have had to. Unfortunately, the bill that was passed, at least in my situation, there are towns in Rutland County where it's now more difficult to develop. So I had to take sort of a measured approach to the bill, and we got what we got. The city of Rutland's delighted. I think the
Right.
town of Rutland is as well. But there are sort of those rural, and especially up the Northeast Kingdom,
Yeah.
it's not going to be as easy as it used to be for them to develop. So maybe more work to come on that.
Yeah, no doubt there's more work to come. I think if you think about it in broad strokes, though, the concept of reforming Act 250 as sort of a policy item was almost never really in a serious way discussed for quite some time in Montpelier. And this is sort of one of the first times where there's been some serious reform. This is a bill that was passed in the early 70s. Right, it was almost
73, I think.
Yeah, an intent on slowing down development.
Yeah, that was its whole purpose.
And in some ways, it's done its job, and in some ways, we're all happy with that. It's a balance. You need to preserve. Our advantage in Vermont is our outdoor recreation, our natural beauty, the ability to live in such a beautiful, great place. And we need to make sure we're working on preserving that. But we also need to make sure people can live here, that we can afford to live here, and that there's a place for people to live. So it's a balancing act. And I think the fact that we've taken a step on reimagining a law from 1973 in a very different world where we live differently, our household size has gone down. We need more housing. In a new economy, we can work remotely. People are attracted to coming to Vermont. It's a good step, and we need to be able to make sure. But I just like anything else relating to housing or any big issue, you're not going to snap your fingers, and you're not going to get it all done in one instance. So we got to keep attention on this issue.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned, Mike, $71 million has been invested to date, And I assume there's a balance or at least a proportionate emphasis on affordable rental housing, housing for Vermonters who are getting out of being homeless. That's a big, big deal down here. Manufactured home communities, home ownership, and then middle-income rental units in some of the bigger cities.
Yeah, it's all of those things. And the other one that we're focused on, and we want to do even more work on it, if we're fortunate to get a second term, is on senior housing. We made a senior housing investment in Vergennes with an assisted living facility that will add 65 new units of homes, for those that are low and moderate income Vermonters. So not only is that 65 new units, but the way that we are going to closely watch and the way that we anticipate this developing is that you have people moving in all from Addison County into Vergennes, into this facility, and their homes, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom homes are now available for a young family. I think one of the challenges we have in Vermont is, there's not a lot of places for people to go, particularly older people. And, when you have that big home that you raised your family in, that's now maybe it's just 2 people or maybe just 1 person, they may want to downsize. They may not want to have the upkeep of the house and all the costs and expense that goes into that and time. But where do you go? And we need more options for senior Vermonters to be able to age affordably here in Vermont.
We were lucky enough to have the governor come down, I want to say 3-4 weeks ago, and I think you have been up to speed on, I just call it the Belden project, but it's going to be, assuming it all falls into place, and right now the main thing is to take care of the dirt that's there in what we call the pit. It's got some chemicals from an old dry cleaning firm that was there that actually, I'm trying to think, I think it's Michigan or someplace in the Midwest where they have to truck this stuff to. It's the only place they can do it. And then the regular kind of oily stuff that accumulated, they can take that over to New Hampshire. But the cost to mitigate that has risen from, I think it was about $500,000 or so. It's over $5 million now.
Yeah.
So without some sort of, I think, federal help, that's sort of the first thing that has to happen is to get that area cleaned up. And then from what I understand, and certainly the governor's much more versed in construction than I am, they pour a concrete slab so it sort of insulates anything from coming up.
Yeah, exactly right.
And then they begin to build. Yeah. And it is going to be a combination of hotel rooms and apartments. And I know already from talking to Mr. Belden, Casella's very interested in taking, I think if they could do it, they'd take every single apartment they could for their employees.
Yes.
But there'll be, I don't know that there'll be enough for everybody that wants one, probably not, because I think it was 25 or 30 apartments, okay? The other beautiful piece of that, we have a parking garage downtown that, quite frankly, is not well used. I'm going to guess maybe 30% of it is full every day from the workers that are downtown. Maybe it's a little higher, maybe lower, I don't know. But there's quite a few spaces that go unused. Uh-huh. And the people that will be in this building, this hotel, can use and there'll be kind of a walkway to get into the hotel from the parking deck. So a lot of things have begun to fall into place for Rutland, and I think that's going to be a really, really important piece.
Oh, 100%. And we're talking with the Beldens about, our office supporting that project. And we're really excited about it. It falls into sort of this category that we've developed within our program of sort of an economic impact project. So it includes housing, which is something that we want to support. But even building a hotel in downtown Rutland where there isn't one, it's going to take some pressure off of this sort of short-term rental space. Because academic research will show when you don't have enough hotel space, it gives more incentive for short-term rentals like Airbnb to pop up, so that people are accommodated, and other people, obviously, the owners can make money.
Yeah.
So having a hotel will actually help with so that pressure on the incentive to have more of our homes in Vermont turning into short-term rentals. And then, of course, it's right across from the Paramount Theater.
Just going to mention that.
So that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, that you can support not only folks coming into town to have a dinner or go to have a drink before or after the show, and people from out of Rutland coming in and staying, but the Paramount can have acts stay at the hotel.
Exactly.
And now that opens them up to a whole new world of who and what can come and perform here in Rutland City. So it's a great project from that perspective. And, that's been sitting vacant for 50 years also.
Oh, I remember. I was here when it burned, so I go back that far. That was 73 as well. And I just wish the Beldens the best of luck. I know the governor was very impressed with the plans that were laid out, the blueprints and all, and hopefully the state will do everything it can to make that happen. It's going to take a few years. It isn't something that's going to get started building tomorrow and be finished by December, but it's on the way, and I think it's going to be absolutely crucial for our area down here. So we have one more topic, and then I just want to open things up in case there's anything else you want to talk about. But we will take one more break here on Catamount Community Connection. We'll be back with State Treasurer Mike Pieciak in just a minute. We are back on Catamount Community Connection. Brian Collamore, your host for the 1 hour show each and every Sunday. And our special guest today is Mike Pieciak, who is the state treasurer for Vermont. One of the other programs, we could probably talk about a whole bunch of programs, but the other one that I think bears repeating if people don't know about it is the Vermont Saves program. And this was put into place for those people who don't already have a retirement plan through their work, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly right. This was our first legislative initiative when I got elected and took office in 2023. And one of the reasons I'm proud of it, which sort of harkens back to the personal story I was telling about at the top of the hour, is that we got support from all parties on this proposal. And when it came time to vote, it was actually unanimous vote in the Senate, and it was a unanimous vote in the House, and the governor signed it. So it was our first initiative to be able to find something that we could get that kind of bipartisan support was really meaningful to me as it being, the first thing we proposed. And it's going to be really meaningful in terms of the impact that it has on Vermonters. There's 88,000 or so Vermonters that don't have access to retirement through their workplace. And when you look at the literature, it says if you don't have access to retirement through your workplace, you just don't save for retirement. So you don't have sufficient resources when it comes time to retire. You have to depend on Social Security, which is not going to sustain you at the same sort of standard of living you were accustomed to. People are not going to have a dignified retirement that they deserve. They're going to be more dependent on state benefits, on local benefits, on federal benefits. So the idea here is, can we create a program that creates that access so that people start to save? So when they get to retirement years, they have assets to be able to live that more dignified retirement, be less dependent on state resources and state benefits. So in the long run, it has less pressure on the budget. People are living a more dignified, independent retirement, and they have more resources to spend in retirement, which is good for our economy as well. So the Vermont Saves program is in the process of being established and implemented. We expect it will be launched by the end of this year, in November through the end of the year. And one of the reasons we're able to do it so fast, it just passed last year, is because we partnered with the state of Colorado to be able to set it up more quickly and to be able to set it up more efficiently. So it's going to cost less by working with the state of Colorado. So I also think it's another just great example of being able to work with another state, leverage our resources together. The state of Delaware, the state of Maine have also joined in this collaboration. So all four of us are working together. It means a better result for all of our citizens in each of our four states. And it will cost less for Vermonters as a result. So the way that it will work is if you're a business or an organization, a nonprofit that doesn't offer retirement, you'll be required to sign up for Vermont Saves. You'll automatically enroll your employees into the program. A Roth IRA will be set up for them. There's no cost to the business for doing this. There's no ongoing cost to the taxpayers. And you can opt out as an employee from the program, but you're automatically opted in. And that's an important concept that we sort of are steering you toward, sort of a better financial decision for yourself. 5% of your payroll will be deducted into the Roth IRA and will be invested on your behalf if you make no decisions. You can take control of your account right at the beginning, and you have total control over the money and how it's invested. But if you don't do anything, the default is that there'd be 5% deducted, that it would be invested in a target date fund that most closely aligns with your retirement date. Again, you can go in, opt out of the program so you don't participate. You can decide you want to invest more than 5%, less than 5%. You can decide you want to invest in a more aggressive target fund, a less aggressive target fund. So you have total control. And the other thing that it does, it's sort of a secondary point, but because it's a Roth IRA, you can take your principal out without penalty or interest. So it sort of secondarily serves as an emergency savings account for folks, because we know so many Vermonters have really no emergency savings. So when something happens to your car or there's some other issue, it really can start to spiral into a much bigger financial challenge for a person and for a family. So we want folks to keep their money invested, and we want them earning and compounding their investments over time so it grows. But it also serves as an emergency savings account if the need arises.
And I think it is important for people to realize it is voluntary. You don't have to do it.
Yes, right. It's important because, people, it's 5% of your pay, So one of the reasons people aren't saving for retirement is access. But another reason is, they just aren't making enough money to put money away for retirement. So we had to be mindful of that. We wanted to provide people access. We wanted to guide them toward a better, longer-term financial decision. But ultimately, they know how to spend their money, and if they need it now and they need it to make sure they have food on the table and that they're paying their rent and everything else that, is costing more, then we need to make sure they have the ability to do that.
I wish that I had that sort of discipline when I was 21, 22 years old.
Don't we all?
It just wasn't what I did. If I wanted to spend whatever I had left over after paying the rent and food to buy a new computer or to buy a fancier car or whatever it is, I would always do that. And it took me until, I was well into my 40s before I even started thinking about investment. I have a son who's just about 30, just shy of that. And he works at he works at General Electric here. And that was one of the first things I encouraged him to do, because they offer quite a retirement package at GE, and he did. Yes. He went full bore into it, and he probably has already put aside more money than I have in my whole life. And it really, really makes a difference.
Yeah, and the money will be working. This is sort of, you get to a certain point, 30, 35, 40, and the money starts working for you in a way that, just it really starts to take off.
Yeah. So the compounding is amazing.
So when we looked at why Vermont Saves was important, a lot of people in their 20s are folks that fall into this sort of category of not having access to retirement because they might work in retail or in hospitality and restaurants. So maybe they just work for certain businesses that don't offer a retirement plan. But if you can save money even a little bit during your 20s, it will really grow by the time you get near retirement age. So that's an important segment of the population that this program will help in our perspective.
And again, we've partnered with Colorado. I think also there are 16 states.
Yeah, this one is a growing movement, that
have enacted the auto IRA programs, is what they're calling it.
Exactly right. I liked this program also because when we announced it as a proposal last year, there were probably 6 or 7 states that had this implemented, and now there's 16. So it was kind of a program where we are sort of near the tip of the spear. Like we were doing something that was innovative, but we weren't the first state. So we were able to learn from all of the other states. And now we can partner with Colorado, which has learned so many lessons along the way. And we're going to benefit from their lessons learned, which is going to be really helpful.
Yeah, I personally have never been a big fan of being the first in the country to do too much of anything, because more often than not, it doesn't work out very well, in my view.
There are always lessons learned from whoever goes first.
So, learn from at least a few other states, especially if they're in New England, and kind of share that geographical perspective. So this sounds pretty good. Are you going to be able to sort of educate people? You mentioned it's going to be rolled out probably by the end of the year. So somewhere at beginning of November, maybe, or middle, you're going to let employees and employers know this is coming?
Yeah, there's a sort of a couple of ways we're going to do that. One is just, employers will be notified through our department, through our vendor, who's called Vestwell, which will have information from the Department of Labor about everybody that's sort of eligible for the program, the universe of businesses and nonprofits and organizations. And you'll get emails or letters or multiple of both as sort of an awareness campaign. That's sort of the basic, but we'll also be out at different employer events and HR events throughout the fall. We'll do all we can on the earned media front to talk about this program. We'll have some paid media as well to sort of bring awareness to employers and to employees. So we'll do everything we can to spread the word. We have an advisory board as well that's been helping us be sort of champions throughout Vermont, which has been great. And then we're also looking to do sort of an early adopter program. So sometime in the fall, we'll have 10 or 15 businesses that will sort of be the early adopters, make sure everything's running well, and then, again, be the champions of sort of encouraging people in their community to sign up and sort of understand what it's all about.
Do you know how the 5% came about as a basement figure kind of?
Yeah, it was what other states were sort of using as an amount. It's a significant amount. It's really probably not sufficient. It is significant, but not sufficient. You really want to be closer to, over 10% of your earnings sort of being put aside. In the state pension program, like I'm involved in, we have 6.5% from the employee, and then the state is contributing like almost close to 20%. I mean, it's a significant portion. If you're in a 401k or a Roth IRA, 10, 12, 15%. So 5% is is a significant amount for a lot of people, but we don't want folks to think that's all they need to do. You can put more aside. You can go up to whatever amount you want. But we didn't want that to be the default because we wanted people to stay in the program. And even if you're saving 5%, it's much better than nothing.
Yeah, and I know for some people, the initial shock, if you will, may have some pain attached to it. Whenever you don't have what you used to have in terms of payment, it's like, ooh, boy, but it's worth it. I can only tell you it's going to be worth it. And again, I'll use my own experience. If I had known at 21 what I know now, I'd be in a much better place for retirement because I would have been doing what this is doing.
Yeah,
really.
And we want it to be, that's sort of the way to do for retirement, right? Set it and forget it. Like once you've set it up, once it's sort of being deposited into a retirement account and earning interest, earning investment returns, you don't miss that money that's coming out of your paycheck. I mean, but you do right at the beginning. But once you get into that habit, and when you get a raise and more is going into your retirement potentially, it's always a good time to sort of examine how much you're putting aside because you might feel a little bit less at sort of a time when you're getting a raise. But it's important to have the future in mind.
Yeah. We're talking to State Treasurer Mike Pieciak. One other thing we want to talk about, we've got about maybe 12 minutes left, is the unclaimed property aspect. And
yes.
you do a good job letting people know.
Well, we're trying to it's your money, right? It's people's money, and we're trying to get it back to them. So the state of Vermont, our office holds about $130 million of unclaimed property that belongs to Vermonters. This past year alone, we brought in $19 million. We paid out $5.8 million. 5.8 is a lot. It's one of our big years. We had more claims processed this year, 19,000, than we've ever had. So we had one of our biggest claims years ever. We got almost $6 million back to Vermonters, but still we had almost 19 million coming in. So the number is growing and growing and growing. So it's why we always try to talk about it and encourage people to visit the website. There's a collection of state treasurers that have a website called missingmoney.com. You can go on and search, and it searches not just Vermont, but all of the states across the country. So go on if it's for yourself. Go on if it's a local nonprofit that maybe you serve on the board or you particularly like. See if they have unclaimed property. Businesses have unclaimed property. We're just down in Brattleboro yesterday, and while we were visiting with folks in town, we looked up and returned $40,000 of unclaimed property to the Brattleboro Retreat, to the hospital, to some local businesses. We even went to the Brattleboro Reformer and talked about missing money and gave them a check for $6,000 because they themselves had unclaimed property.
Wow.
So it's really, a lot of people, in Vermont have it and they don't know about it. So we try to bring awareness to this program. And one of the things we did was try to be more proactive. We have a program that we set up with the tax department. That was sort of a pilot program where we identified about 350 Vermonters that we could we could verify their identity with the tax department, verify their address was up to date, and then we just automatically sent them checks. So these were folks that had unclaimed property in the sort of $200 to $250 range. So they got a letter from our office saying they were in the pilot project, and then a couple weeks later they got their check. And it was sort of a proactive way of getting it back to them. It worked really well, and we'd like to expand that even more. And then we did a similar thing with nonprofits as well, trying to get money automatically back to nonprofits in Vermont. But like I said, despite all of our best efforts, that money keeps growing and growing and growing. And we want to encourage Vermonters to search missingmoney.com.
So when you say unclaimed property, I'm assuming that could be a bank account that expired,
yes.
Or is it land? I mean, is it actual property in some cases?
Yeah, so anything that sort of requires a deed or a title doesn't come to our office. So that's land, and that's automobiles and things of that nature. But if it's cash, if it's stock, if it's insurance proceeds, even if it's like the contents of a safety deposit box, those things come to our office. So we recently had NBC5 come in and take a look at what we call our vault, what's in the vault. So we had a lot of silver bars, a lot of gold bars, family heirlooms, sterling silver plates, and we just sort of showed what sort of treasures the office holds to try to get back to people. But on top of those items, we have stock certificates, we have a whole variety of unclaimed property, and then we just have a lot of cash proceeds. So maybe somebody tried to make a final paycheck payment to you, and they, you had moved, and the check went to the wrong address, and you never got it, or maybe there's some sort of deposit that you put down with utility, and they mailed it to you, and you had moved, or you threw the check away, you forgot about it. So there's a whole variety of ways that unclaimed property can get into our hands, and we try to get it back to you. There's a story just from this past winter. I went down to Windham County for some of the town meetings in March, and I was visiting with my dad beforehand, and I had the town of Putney, which had a really big unclaimed property list. So there's a lot of folks with unclaimed property in Putney, and I was looking at some of the bigger claims, and there was somebody that had $38,000. I said, "Dad, you know this person?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I've been doing his taxes for 40 years."
Oh my gosh!
I said, "Oh geez, can you confirm it's him? Here's the address I have, and you have the phone number." And so I called him up the next day, and first you have to convince people that's not a scam. But I said, I'm in Putney. I saw your name on the unclaimed property list. I want to verify it's you, and I want to make sure we get this money back to you. And we were able to do that, and it was $38,000. The gentleman was in his late 90s, and I heard from his family who said, we didn't know this money was there. It was the insurance proceeds. We would never have known to claim it. And now that we have it, our dad can stay in his house for another year because of it.
What a great story.
Yeah. So it just, really sort of speaks to the power of making sure we get the money back to Vermonters' hands.
So we have about 4 minutes. If we haven't talked about anything you want to talk about, or let anybody know something new happening, you got 4 minutes.
Nice. Well, one of the things that we didn't touch too much on, but with the news from this past week relating to the weather that's happening all throughout Vermont, climate resiliency is something that our office has also been focusing on. We announced with Governor Scott that we would work on a resiliency plan, our office and his Agency of Natural Resources. It's something that we hope to propose by next July. I think that's going to be a really important thing for Vermont because our climate is getting warmer. It's getting wetter. These rain events like we saw in this past week are unfortunately going to become more frequent. And our landscape, our geography makes such that these mountains collect so much rain. They come down into the valleys, into the rivers, into the streams, and then we see this flooding that's happening. So other than housing, I think making sure climate resiliency is at the top of our agenda is going to be one of the important things for the long term. Because we know this is just going to keep happening, and unfortunately it will happen at a more intense and a quicker pace as well. So I just want to mention that as an initiative, again, we're working on with the governor's office, and I think it'll be really important in building safe, secure communities into the future.
Yeah, unfortunately, we went through Irene and we thought, phew,
yeah, exactly
got by that. We won't have to worry about that again for a few years. And then all of a sudden, 10 or 11 years later, it happened again. I know culvert size increased. I mean, there's other ways to sort of take the water that's at the highest elevation and slow it down to some degree and, in a sense, store it for a while.
100%.
And
there's a lot, it's a terrible thing, obviously, that happened. Irene, the flooding last year, the repeat flooding this year. But there are a lot of examples to be hopeful about. There were fewer bridges washed out last year than Irene, fewer culverts. The state office complex in Waterbury that was totally destroyed, and Irene didn't have any damage this year. There are examples of buildings in Montpelier that were retrofitted, that were not impacted. New buildings that were intentionally designed to be resilient to flooding that weren't impacted. So we have the ability to, do these things. We have to have a strategy, and we have to figure out how to pay for it. But we're going to pay for it either way, either up front and preventing it from happening, or after a horrible flooding
and
storm
more expensive after, probably.
Always is, yeah.
All right, Brattleboro native Mike Pieciak, State Treasurer. I really appreciate you joining us today. Hopefully we've got the message out about a whole bunch of great programs that you are in the middle of doing, and can't wait to have you come back.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, Mike,
appreciate it.
Take care. Our show again brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, and the fair is coming up a couple of weeks away. Get your Tyler Hubbard tickets at ParamountVT.org, and we will see all of you again next Sunday on Catamount Community Connection.